So we have two speakers next, both from right-of-way. A lot of questions about right-of-way, a lot of information about right-of-way. So that's why we have Keith Benjamin, who's the right-of-way, say that 3 times fast, operations and policy analyst, and then Dave Thiessen, who is the statewide relocation reviewer and condemnation officer. Here they are.
Thank you. We're going to talk about right-of-way today, and before I get started introducing ourselves, I want to do a quick survey here. How many of you have ever had a project that involved needing additional right-of-way? That's a good turnout, yeah. How many have had me as a right-of-way project manager on your project? Okay. I won't be talking about those projects today for your benefit, except the good parts, right? We'll keep the good parts. I'm Dave Thiessen. My title is Statewide Relocation Reviewer and Condemnation Officer. It's kind of a fancy title, but basically I started ODOT in 2004. I came from the Department of Human Services. I was a caseworker there. That's a thankless job. But came here as an agent and worked my way up to a senior agent, then transferred to the statewide project delivery branch as the ADA right-of-way program manager, and then on to my current job. In my current responsibilities, I review all the relocations that come into the office and any files that get condemned. I'm responsible for those. Having headquarters experience and region experience has really broadened my horizon and made me, I think, a better right-of-way agent. But you know what I really have respect for is the job you guys do, as transportation project managers. So I know you have a tough job, and my job is to try and make right-of-way as smooth as possible. So hopefully we can do that, and hopefully today I can tell you a little bit about right-of-way and make the process a little smoother. I'm going to let Keith introduce himself now.
Good morning. So as David said, my name is Keith Benjamin. Actually, the information up there is about 3 weeks too old. I am no longer the operations and policy analyst. I'm the interim right-of-way programs manager. So for those of you who know Mike Kirby, he is retired. I'm filling in for him for the next 18 months. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that job in a bit and just sort of highlight what that is. But for the last 2.5 years, I was a policy and management analyst dealing with policies out of our TLC and also interacting with regions and helping them stay on course with some of their items in their projects. Before that, I did spend 2.5 years at Region 2 working with David. He likes to consider himself my mentor. That is, in fact, true. But working projects and learning how right-of-way actually works. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today. I do thank you for coming and listening and hopefully learning something. David's going to have some good stories to tell about his experience working in right-of-way at the region, so I hope you enjoy those. So I do first want to introduce a little bit about right-of-way, what right-of-way does. So I see a lot of familiar faces. I think that everybody knows primarily our job is to buy the property that we need for our projects. We do other things, and we're going to talk a little bit about those things up there. Scott Claus is a state right-of-way manager. He oversees those things on the left out of the statewide project delivery branch. That includes operations and programs. So programs is my new job, and I'll get to that in a second. The operations side, Mike Stone is the operations manager, the deputy state right-of-way manager. So he handles those 4 areas up there. Appraisal review, we've got 4 appraisal reviewers. It's important for you to know that appraisal is very much behind what we do and everything that we do. So all appraisal reports have to go through the review appraisers at the TLC. Next, we've got a title services unit. So their job is primarily to work with the regions to identify what those ownership interests are that are going to have to be acquired. They do that up front. And then on the back end, after it's acquired, making sure that we actually get possession of those properties through title companies. Next, David introduced himself as a relocation reviewer and a condemnation legal liaison. So we have 2 people in our office that share those duties. He'll get into more detail about those, but we displace people, businesses, homes. If you just have personal property, maybe you don't have to leave anywhere, but you've got an item in the property that we're acquiring. All those things are are going to be relocated, and people will get compensated for that. And so that's what relocation reviewers look over and make sure that our agents in the regions are doing those things appropriately. And last, what we'll also get to is ultimately we have condemnation authority, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later. But because we have legal liaisons in the office that deal with our DOJ partners, the attorneys that help us get possession when we can't come to terms with property owners for what we're purchasing. So those are the sections in operations that are out of the TLC. The programs part, the part that I'm managing now, includes some interesting things. Property management. So we have 5 property agents in Salem and in Portland. Their job primarily is to sell excess land that we have. We have a goal of selling $9 million of excess property every year, and that's primarily their job. We have a rail and utility specialists in our group. The rail specialists, their job is to make sure that the agreements with the railroads are done in time for certification of our projects. If we have to buy property from a railroad, they would be front of that line to make sure that gets done on time. The utility specialists will make sure that any relocation of utilities that are reimbursable are taken care of, and I believe you guys are going to be getting some information on that later today. Section 9. This is a new section that was created out of the transportation package. It's basically our job to inventory all of the excess property that we have, to get some data on it, kind of an estimate of what it's worth, and then if we think it is something that we could sell at a future date. So we have a new team of people that are gathering data throughout all the regions and the thousands of properties that we actually own that are excess to our right-of-way needs, so that we can eventually sell those if applicable. Whether you know it or not, we are actually in charge of billboards. The outdoor advertising signs around the state that are visible to the highway, we have to administer and permit those. All that work is done out of the programs office in right-of-way. And then lastly, we have a gentleman in our office that handles access research issues that often come up when we have to acquire property. We've got to deal with driveways, widening, or moving them or whatever. So we do handle some of that research out of our office.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the region tech centers and what goes on there, because I spent 12 of my years at the tech center. Every tech center has a right-of-way manager, and that manager is responsible for the overall program of right-of-way for the region. One region has a right-of-way program manager, that's Region 1, and that person is responsible for a lot of the contracts. Region 1 has a small right-of-way staff, and so they can't do all the work that is going on in Region 1, so they rely heavily on consultants. Next down the chain is the senior agents, also known as right-of-way project managers, but they're responsible for being a member on your project delivery team. They're responsible for assigning all the work to the agents, both appraisals, negotiations, relocations. They're going to be your primary contact on your team for any right-of-way issues. So if a right-of-way issue comes up, they're the ones to talk to first, and then they'll elevate it up to their manager, and then if it needs to, up to the statewide project delivery branch. And then there's the agents, who are the workhorses of the agency. They are the ones who actually do the work. They do appraisals, they do acquisitions, they do relocations. They're the ones out there meeting with property owners and negotiating on a daily basis and taking the beatings sometimes. But not all transactions go sideways, but we'll talk about some of those sideways ones because those are the most interesting. And we also have our consultant partners that work with us. Now, there's some things that the consultants can't or we don't have them do. One of those is condemnation. They can prepare the recommendation for condemnation, but they cannot act on DOJ's behalf. That's DOJ's job to handle all of our condemnations. And the other thing they cannot do is set just compensation. And Keith alluded to that a little bit in the appraisal talk, but just compensation comes out of the appraisal, and the appraisal reviewer reviews that appraisal to make sure that it meets a certain standard. And then our chief appraiser then sets the just compensation, and that's the amount that we're going to offer the property owner. And that's the amount we believe the property is worth. So I think I'm going to go back to Keith.
So before I go to the next slide, I want to touch a little bit on that last point about consultants. Not all right-of-way tasks can be outsourced. And we're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide about that. But I do want to hit on that point here with respect to those items on the left that happen to the TLC. I mean, at this point, we don't really outsource any of the work that right-of-way does out of the TLC. I can tell you that at present, we are doing some pilot programs with respect to appraisal review and title services to see if it makes sense to do those things in the future. We're sort of testing that out right now. In the past, we have consulted out appraisal review work. It does make it take longer. We still have to have our review appraisers look at those things, and it is more expensive to do it that way. Title services is a little more complicated. Even title companies don't exactly know what we do when it comes to clearing title. We have some very specific rules that we have to follow, things that we can and cannot clear when we're acquiring property, but we are doing a pilot project on that. The other thing we're going to start exploring here pretty soon is consulting out property management. So I told you that we do sell our access property. I think it makes a lot of sense to me and to others that this is possibly something we can consult out to make sure that we're selling that property as quick and efficiently as possible. So we are exploring those things. So what I'll hit to in just a minute is the other things that we actually do in fact consult out with the work that we do. So on this slide, I want to ask a question. If you recognize this quote that I'm about to give you, raise your hand. Damon probably does, so I'm not going to count you if you raise your hand. But the quote is, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Does anybody know where that comes from? Looks like Tiffany does, maybe. So that's out of the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. When we're talking about right-of-way is buying property. This was set up in the Constitution all those years ago, and it was in response to the King of England being able to take property from the colonies without paying for it. And so our government set up rules so that no longer can happen. It's protect private property rights. This is important because basically everything hinges in right-of-way upon that power. We have the power to take what we need for a public purpose so long as we're paying for it. And everything starts and ends from there with right-of-way. That's kind of the end. When we get to the bottom of this in condemnation, that's where we're headed to. So all the work that we do is to try and acquire the property and make sure that we're doing it right so that if we have to condemn, we can get there. And David will explain a little bit more about that. Those 4 items up there are not exclusive, are not all of the work that right-of-way does. We do more than this on a project level. But the bulk of our work starts at the appraisal. So before the appraisal, and we'll talk about scoping and our role in that and estimates, but most of our work starts at the appraisal at that DAP phase gate when we get those legal descriptions, and it sets the footprint for what right-of-way needs to acquire. At that point, we can actually start the real work of appraising property. So as I mentioned, we have 4 review appraisers. They're kind of the back end of that appraisal process. But before that, when we have established what it is we have to buy, we have experts go out and value those things. We value things by the square foot. It's important that you know this, because if those square feet change, then we have to go back to the beginning of what we're doing. For simple appraisal reports, we often do that in-house. Our right-of-way agents or senior agents are capable of doing that, and they often do those appraisal reports in-house. For the more complex things, we hire fee appraisers to do that. That's some of the work that we consult out. It's most of the work that we consult out are those fee appraisers. We do have a qualified appraiser list, and the only appraisers that we can hire are people that have been pre-qualified and have all that experience necessary to do that. So I'm imagining most of you are familiar with appraisals in general, like when you buy a house, a couple pages long, pretty simple, shows some comps. That is not what we're talking about with respect to right-of-way appraisals. They're far more complicated. I would say oftentimes our appraisal reports are over 100 pages long. It's because we have to keep in mind the end, that we have to be able to condemn these things. And they have to be able to have all this information that tells the property owner, this is what we're buying and why, and this is why we have the right to do it, this is what's going to happen on your property, and explain all of that. It's very complex. So the next step in our process is then going to be the acquisition. After that appraisal report gets through the review process, it sets the just compensation. This is the amount at a minimum that we're going to pay the property owner when we make that offer. So that's the acquisition process, is making that offer, and there's a number of documents that go into that offer. The appraisal goes in it. We have a summary sheet that summarizes the values of what we're going to be buying and paying for. We have terms of that offer. It's basically explaining things like if we're impacting your access, how is that going to change? If you have some things in these acquisition areas, they may or may not be impacted by that. Maybe we can protect them in place. The terms can explain that. It will include the deed or the other conveyance documents that have to be signed and recorded. And it can include the summary of your relocation benefits and the explanation of those benefits that you are owed out of a relocation. Again, this is a task that we also consult out very regularly. We have all sorts of consultant partners around the state that act as agents for us. They go out in the field, they make those offers, they negotiate those files, and that's really what this is. This is a negotiation with the property owners. We're telling you how much we think the property is worth, and then let's talk about it. It's almost like buying a car. We're going to sometimes have to haggle over the price, and we're going to have to make deals over what makes sense. Sometimes we pay more than just compensation. But sometimes what the property owner is asking for is a little bit out of bounds of what we think it's worth, and we need to take care of the public funds that are used to buy property. And so that's where condemnation comes into play. I'll turn it over to David to take over the rest of this slide.
I'm just going to add a little bit more onto the acquisition, because it's not always about dollars and cents with property owners. Sometimes it's grandma's rose bush out in the front yard, and you're hitting my favorite whatever it is, and working with the property owner on those issues to help them get to a point where they feel comfortable in signing. So sometimes we're going to ask you to help us out a little bit, and when we write state's obligations, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later, but sometimes state's obligations allows the state to do certain tasks like, protect grandma's favorite tree, whatever it is, because Fido's buried underneath it, or hopefully not a living person, or not a living person, but that'd be even worse, right, with Halloween coming up. But anyway, I've never ran across a grave, but I've heard stories of. For relocation, basically we buy realty. We buy real property, and we move personal property. So there's 4 types of relocation. There is residential, non-residential, which is businesses, signs, which are the outdoor advertising signs, billboards, and then personal property only. So if somebody's got a car, it's dilapidated, doesn't function, it's parked there in the acquisition area, we'll pay to move that car. We don't buy the car, even though it may be physically implanted into the dirt because it's been sitting there so long, but we consider that to be personal property, and we relocate those things. I'll get into the specifics of the relocation benefits a little bit later, but our relocation is set out in the Uniform Relocation Act, and we receive a lot of scrutiny from our federal partners on this program. They watch it very closely, and if we ever tried to certify a project where we had not relocated a person, they would not allow us to move forward without real strong mitigating circumstances around that, because they don't want us putting a bulldozer out in front of somebody's house and forcing them to get out. That's why anytime we have a relocation on a project, it's really important to give enough time so that we can work with those people to get them out. Condemnation is where we've made the offer, we've negotiated in good faith with the property owner, we've tried our best to come to an agreement, but for whatever reason, we can't come to an agreement. Now, it's not always about the money. It can be a title issue. Maybe there's a loan on the property, and we have to clear the loan, and it's an internet mortgage company, and they don't return your calls, and you can't get a hold of anybody. And so sometimes It's not always about dollars. It can be about other things that we have to condemn a file to get possession so that we can continue on with the project. Now, condemnation gives us physical possession of the property, not legal possession. So it gives us all the rights we need to construct our project, but it does not give us legal title to the property. That actually comes either when they sign the deed at a later date or the judge and jury give us legal rights. But we have all the rights what we need when we condemn. And so the condemnation process goes, we've done a negotiation, we've turned in a recommendation to condemn. That comes to headquarters, and then I take that and we work with DOJ. DOJ will file that condemnation with the court, and when they file it and we deposit the just compensation money with the court, we then gain possession on that date or 30 days after. It depends on the type of acquisition it is. But that's just that little process there, just for DOJ to do that action is roughly $5,000. So that doesn't include ODOT's cost, my cost, those kinds of things. So it adds up, and that's just the beginning, because that's not DOJ negotiating, that's not DOJ mediating. In fact, when we've gone to trial on some of these, our DOJ bills, $150,000, $200,000. If we get stuck paying the other side's bills, it's $400,000, $500,000 on top of whatever the difference between what we offered and what the jury eventually gave them. So it can be very expensive, and it can really blow a project budget. In fact, I know Region 1 had to go back to the well recently on a project because there were so many condemnations and it just blew the budget. So something to think about when we're doing this. So giving us enough time to properly negotiate these or to settle the title issues or what have you really can save your project dollars and cents in the end. Hey, where's my buddy?
You're next, dude.
Oh,
I'm right over here.
all right, well. You're right, I am next. So which of these are right-of-way acquisitions? Well, all except, relocation's kind of not really a right-of-way acquisition, but you're right. So temporary easements, permanent easements, partials, fulls. A lot of people say, oh, well, I'm doing a project, I don't need any right-of-way. I just need some TCEs, some temporary construction easements. Well, those take us just the same amount of time to get, and we have to go through the exact same process as we do for a full acquisition. Anytime you need any kind of right from a property owner, it's a taking of some sort. Temporary easements, just like it says, it's temporary. Can't leave permanent features in the temporary easement unless you unless you don't care if they are removed. So after the project, that property goes back to the property owner. Basically, a temporary easement is kind of a lease. We're leasing that property for a certain use. And when it goes back to the property owner, if you have something there that's supporting the highway, they can take it out. So you would want a permanent easement in that kind of situation. So if you want something left permanently to support the highway system, like a slope or a retaining wall or those types of things, a drainage feature, then we need to protect them either with a permanent easement or a full acquisition. There's all kinds of, I didn't bring it. There's all kinds of different temporary easements and permanent easements that are available. We have a list. It's like, it was put through DOJ, and it's like 80 or 90 different types of temporary easements and permanent easements. So chances are, if you have a certain design feature that you want in there, there's an easement that will take care of that. Now at ODOT, we tend to buy a lot of stuff in fee. And fee is taking all the rights. They talk about a bundle of sticks, and all the different rights are this bundle. And taking fee acquisition is taking all the rights. Basically, when you buy your house, you're buying everything. An easement is just buying a right to do a particular thing. Like a permanent easement for a slope, we can put our slope on it, but the property owner can still landscape it, park on it, do anything else that doesn't directly conflict with the use that we want to use it for. So I talked about temporary, permanent. Partial acquisitions, that's where we're not acquiring the entire property, we're acquiring part of the property, which is 97% of the work we do in right-of-way is partial acquisitions, which is really what differentiates right-of-way from typical real estate transactions. So when you go out and buy a property, you don't buy half the property or just the first 5 feet of the property, you buy the entire property, right? So this is a little bit different, and this is why it's a little more complex, and the appraisal process is a little more difficult because that little bit of property isn't typically bought and sold in the market. So there can also be damages that can be attributable to the remainder property, the part of the property we're not taking. So if we slice through somebody's irrigation system with our taking, now the irrigation system won't work because it's cut and water's spewing all over the street, and so it's actually the damage would be the remaining part of the irrigation system that now doesn't work. So we have to pay for those damages through the appraisal process. And that's kind of the difference when you're doing a partial acquisition, is that there can be additional costs that is more than just the price of the land. So I'll move on to the relocation benefits. In residential, we really take care of the property owner, and not so much under non-residential, but for residential, I think of this example we had in Newburgh. We had this lady. She had a house that was, had a lot of deferred maintenance on it, and we were able to put her into a decent, safe, and sanitary. That's a term we use in relocation, residence. And we did that through a housing additive. And basically what a housing additive is, you take the amount, so we pay her a certain amount. Let's say $200,000. I'm just making up numbers. $200,000 for her house, right? And then we go out in the market and we look around for comparables. We'd look for one that was habitable, right? So if her house was a 3-2, 1,500 square feet, we'd look for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house. And so we got her house at $200,000. But out in the market now, because the appraisal was done and it's based on comps that were 6 months ago, maybe the value we got for her house was maybe a year ago, right? So the market's going up, right? The $200,000 we're paying them isn't enough for them to go out and buy another house today. So maybe the houses out there now are $220,000, right? She got a big additive to go out and spend on another house. So that's the kind of thing that I like about the relocation program, is it's taking care of people and putting them into at least as good, if not better, situation. The non-residential, not as good. We do pay for a lot of things like site search. We pay to move everything, of course. But there's a lot of things, loss of business, that we don't pay for. It's tough on a business sometimes to get relocated. But we did have one recently in Newburgh. It was a drive-up barbecue, Slick's Barbecue in Newburgh. They found him another place. They moved to Wilsonville. And I went back after we had moved him and got him set up. And it was like 6 weeks later. And he says, in the last 6 weeks, I've made more money than I did in a whole year at the last place. But did he say, thank you, ODOT? No, no, ODOT's always the dog, right? So, But we pay for a lot of things, but not everything. I talked a little bit about moving site search, reconnecting equipment. So in their case, they had in the barbecue place, they had different equipment that they had to hook up. So we paid to rehook up that. They had a big Traeger commercial barbecuer, and that had to be outside when they cooked. But by code, it had to be covered. So we got them a new cover for the thing. They needed a roll-up door to roll the barbecue in at night so it didn't get stolen. Things like that we were able to cover. We also can cover like a new sign or soiled carpet or paint. But those things are kind of capped under $25,000. So $25,000 goes pretty quickly when you're doing a business at a new site. So I think I did everything.
So really quickly with this slide, it should go without saying that communication is pretty important, and it goes both ways. Your senior agents are going to be partners with you guys on your PDTs. I think you probably know they need to be at all those PDT meetings. They need to be part of that scope, schedule, budget discussion. Those are the kind of things that they are going to contribute to for you guys. They're going to have those conversations with you and share the kind of right-of-way perspective when it comes to scope, schedule, and budget. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about some of those deliverables that right-of-way is going to provide, states' obligations, certifications, and estimates. And we'll talk a little more detail later. But that's the kind of information that they're going to be providing to you at those PDT meetings, whether it's at the DAP phase gate, before PS&E, or those milestones, advanced plans, final plans, that sort of thing. They'll be there and can give you that information that you need to know about to keep that project on schedule. And likewise, when you're having meetings, give them that good information about scope, schedule, and budget, the good data that's going to help them understand this is what I need to know about as I'm working my project to keep my project and my work and my deliverables on time. Now, David hit a little bit on two really important things that really will impact right-of-way a lot, and why it's important to keep this communication open. If the project footprint changes too late into the process, then right-of-way is going to have to go back and, for instance, start the appraisal over. That's really important. And so, again, it's really important to communicate that as early as possible with your senior agent so that they know in advance, hey, I've got this on the horizon. I might have to change things. I might need to go talk to my appraiser right now to say, hey, hold up a second. We've got some description changes that are coming. Likewise, schedule. So I know schedules, we like to hold them, but if they move forward, if they move back, that's going to impact right-of-way a lot. And David's going to talk in just a minute about the timelines and the kind of pressures that we're under and how those deliverables that we have or the other internal things that we do have some defined timelines that we have to meet and how much time we have to do certain things or how much time we have to wait before we can move to other tasks. And so when we get changes in the schedule, it impacts right-of-way a lot. So make sure you're communicating those things with your senior agent, that point of contact that you've got. You need to know, senior agent, that we're talking about moving this schedule out a little bit, or we're talking about moving this schedule up a little bit. How does that impact you? Where are you at with your things? Do you think you can work with us here, or is that going to be an issue? So those are really important things, and I think we're going to move into timeline next then.
So you're looking at 47, 77 weeks. You're going, holy crumb, David, what are you talking about there? That's an awful long time for a property. But you know what? Some of these properties are really complicated. A large manufacturing facility, originally we looked at, we were going to take a lot more property on Newburgh-Dundee bypass from the mill. And I was a little bit worried, how do you relocate a paper mill? That's pretty complex. So, something like that, 77 weeks isn't enough. I mean, we need to start way, way, way early. They may have to build something to ahead of time to be able to accommodate the stuff we move. So we basically start when we receive the right-of-way maps and descriptions, and then from that point, we look at those maps and descriptions, come up with a programming estimate. So that's our best guess of what we think it's going to cost for all the fees and costs associated with acquiring that right-of-way. And that includes factoring in some condemnation costs because we don't know if we're going to have a condemnation or not. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we don't, but we put some money in there. Not enough to fund all of them because you wouldn't build anything. So once that gets approved by the feds, if it's a federal project or just the OTC, then we move on to, we send out our general information notice. And it's just a basic, hey, you know, we got a project coming, we're going to need to buy some property. Here's a sketch map of what we're going to need to buy. We'll be in contact with you shortly. Next person they hear from would be our appraiser, who sends out a 15-day notice and lets them know, hey, I'm going to be coming by and looking at your place. You know, if you got some questions, we can talk about it. So they go out and do their thing, meet with the property owner, do their appraisal. Appraisal comes back in. Our appraisal review department gets a hold of it. They read through, make sure that it looks good, and they set just compensation. Then we go ahead and we make our offer to the property owner, and we negotiate for a minimum of 40 days. 40 days typically is not enough, but, you know, that's statutory. If we have to, at 40 days, we can recommend condemnation. We send out a final offer letter, our headquarters department does, when a condemnation comes in. We say, hey, you sure we can't make a deal? And so then we go ahead and file our condemnation with the court, and we put the money into court. And at that point, then we have possession. Now, the condemnation process doesn't stop there. DOJ takes over, and they mediate and mitigate and try and work out whatever issues they may have. But if they can't come to a deal, then we go to a trial, and a judge and a jury will decide what the property is worth. Not whether or not we get to take the property, that's already been decided, but how much are we going to pay? And then, oh, I forgot, we certify at PS&E, so we write a certification. I think that's it. You up?
Yeah. So I do want to point out, if you look at that slide up there, we've got references. So a lot of what we do is statutorily driven. We've got to do it, and a lot of those statutes speak to how long we have to give or how long it takes to do certain things. You'll also see references to CFRs, Code of Federal Regulations. These are the regulations and statutes we've got to follow. And a lot of the timelines that we've got are driven by those, and there's really not a lot of flexibility there. So,
before you flip, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So, and just Keith mentioned this a minute ago. If we have to restart, it's costly, and it really can screw up our time. Because if we have to go all the way back, say we added a file at the last minute, we got to go all the way back to programming and authorization. So it can really mess up your timeline. So it's very important that when we hit DAP, we're done, and no more footprint set. Sorry, Keith.
So let's talk deliverables for a bit. And, you know, these are, I'm going to really keen on the things that are important to you guys. We have all sorts of deliverables, but these are the ones that you guys are going to be focused on. I'll probably kind of glaze over number 3. I mean, our agents are going to be meeting with you at these milestone dates and letting you know how things are going and anything we need to be aware of. But before that, like we've talked about earlier, right-of-way needs to be involved at scoping. They're going to be providing a scoping estimate for you. Obviously, you need that in order to load property into your STIP budget. That kind of drives the project and how much money needs to be there for it to get started. Having an agent on that scoping team is crucial to that. They need to be out in the field looking at that, seeing what's on the ground, having conversations with all the discipline experts, giving advice, maybe asking if certain things can be avoided because it might save you a lot of money down the road. Those are the kind of conversations, but out of that comes a scoping estimate from your senior agent so that you can have that money loaded properly into the STIP. Program estimate is fast forwarding a little bit, and we'll get the racetrack up there in a second. The program estimate is key for us because that's really when our work starts. So now at DAP, we have the new requirement that legal descriptions get done. When legal descriptions are done, we can do our programming estimate. Like I said earlier, we appraise and acquire based on the square foot. That's what the legal description tells us. How much are we buying? We need to know that. And until we get that programming estimate, which happens now right after DAP, we can't start our appraisal process. And we get back to that slide before, and you see those kind of timelines that we're working from. We can't start those appraisals until we can tell the appraiser, this is what you're appraising exactly. That's why the program estimate is so key, and that's why legal descriptions are so key. We need to get that authorization from the feds to move forward with the actual bulk of the work that we do. Number 4, so this is obviously the end key for us. So we have other things that we do at the end of projects, but certification. So we always certify our projects when we're done or when we're close to done, and I'll explain the difference there. We really have 3 levels of certification, Cert 1, and these all come in at the PS&E timeline. Certification 1 basically says, we're done. We've got everything that we need right now. We have possession of all of it. You are free to go and do your project. Certification 2, that says, we've got pretty much everything now. There may be a few files in which we don't have possession yet, but we know that we're going to get possession before you go to bid. Now, we have ways of determining possession certainty. We use the condemnation process for that, in which we can say with certainty we are going to have possession before bid let, so you are fine going forward with bid let. Just know that these properties are not in possession yet, but they will be at bid let. A Cert 3 basically is saying that we've got possession of most of the properties, but there's a couple out there, and we're not going to have possession until after bid let. So this is important because the spec writer then has to hold those properties out for those people that are bidding on this project. You can't go and work on this property or these properties yet. This becomes a problem. It could raise the expense for the construction. If we've got enough files on that project with a Cert 3, it may be that our partners at FHWA will not actually let us certify and then move forward with bid let. Your senior agent should be working with you to put together a project public impact finding. No, public interest. I got the I wrong. The PIF, public interest finding. So that the feds can see this is why we think it's okay to move forward with the Cert 3. We don't have possession on all the properties. We're going to get there, and we need to get buy-in from the feds. Yeah, we agree. It's probably in the best interest to move forward, and we think with some certainty you'll get things in enough time, and it's not going to cost us, the feds, too much money to have these holdouts. But that's why we don't want to go the Cert 3 route. That's why it's so important to hold our footprint, to keep our schedules the way that we do. The last thing, states' obligations, and I'll give some generic examples of this. So through the negotiation process, you're often talking about money, but as David has explained, there's other things that come up that a property owner would like to have done, and sometimes that makes sense. We can do things for you to help this go a little more smoothly. So we live in Oregon. Trees are important to people. Maybe there's a tree in a permanent easement area, and normally, we might want to cut that tree down, but the property owner is interested in keeping that tree in there. The senior agent can work with project manager and the construction project manager, ask the question, is it okay if we keep this tree in here, or is it going to throw the project off? If it's okay, then we can put into the plans if there's enough time to protect and place that tree. If there's not enough time to get that in the plans, we can do a state's obligation, that is then our entry formally and a notice to construction that we're agreeing that the tree can stay. It's not in the plans, but that tree is going to stay and it's going to be protected. The reverse can also be true. So maybe the property owner knows that we're coming through, we're going to be cutting down some trees in our new right-of-way, and they've got a tree that they want to have come down in their property, not in a piece that we're taking, and they're like, so long as you're out cutting these trees down in the new right-of-way, you mind grabbing this one as well. We can negotiate with that. We can do a state's obligation that we've got permission from all the necessary parties to do that task, if you will, for the property owner, and that gets captured in the state's obligation agreement, assuming that the senior agent is working with the project manager and the construction project manager, and this is all on the up and up. Those are the kind of things that can happen in state's obligations. They can get far more complex and complicated than that. But again, these are the deliverables that your senior right-of-way agent is going to be providing to you there when we get to certification, so that everybody understands this is what construction is going to be doing from a right-of-way perspective. So this is our racetrack that we're all familiar with. We talked a lot about these things. Right-of-way really does come in at the scoping level. You can see that early on in the process. Have them be part of the team. They need to provide some input there on scope, schedule, and budget. They need to provide some advice possibly on things to avoid. You know, billboards are a big thing these days. We have some different rules that we have to abide by if we're going to be impacting a billboard. That would be a good thing to have your right-of-way agent involved at the scoping level so you can say, hey, is there any way we can design around this billboard and not hit it? As you lead into DAP, we've talked about having those legal descriptions done by that DAP phase gate. Super important so that once we hit after that DAP phase gate, right-of-way can start. They can get authorized, they can submit that programming estimate to the feds, and they can get started on that appraisal work because all of our work gets done between that statewide phase gate at DAP and then PS&E. That's where the bulk of our work gets done. In those three preliminary plans, advanced plans, final plans areas, that's when we're doing all of our work. That's the timeline that David showed you, and that we've got to do all that. And then obviously at that PS&E level is when we're providing that certification, we're providing those state's obligations so that we can tell you we're done, or we're not quite done, we're almost done, and here's the other things you need to know about that we've agreed upon that are going to be done during construction.
So we're not necessarily done at certification. And Keith mentioned a little bit about the Cert 1, Cert 2, Cert 3, and the Cert 3s, we're still working on those after PS&E, and we're working on them after bidlet. And so that's something we continue on beyond the PS&E date. We also handling unforeseen construction issues, things like landslides. One of my favorite projects, Pioneer Mountain, Eddyville. I'm sure you guys are maybe aware of that project, but we went back to the property owner so many times for additional land because we had additional landslides. So we're on a first name basis, by the way, now, and actually they're good people to work with. So it was actually a timber company, and but we can still have construction issues afterwards. We can have utility issues. In Tillamook, one time we severed off a piece of property, and there were utilities there before, but they rerouted the road, and now they didn't. The utility company put the utilities over on the reroute, and they didn't run utilities back to the other piece of the property that we left behind. And so we ended up having to pay to bring utilities over there. So there's a lot of different things we do. We also, at the end of the project, do relinquishments and jurisdictional transfers. So right now on Newburgh-Dundee, I'm just now getting into the relinquishments and jurisdictional transfers on that project, and it's been done for a couple of years now at least. So. All right, who wants to be a secret agent? Anybody want to be a secret agent? I hope not. All right, secret agents are those project leaders, project managers that sneak out and go negotiate with property owners in secret. We don't want right-of-way involved. No. Yeah, so anyway, I had a project manager that used to do that. I won't share their name. Yeah, well, now you're giving them who it might be. But anyway, they were notorious for getting out there out front and promising the property owner the moon. And I would show up to negotiate the file, and, well, you're going to give me this and this and this. I'm like, what? Oh, yeah, that's what so-and-so said. He promised. And so I was like, oh, dang it. You know, so then I'd have to unwind the whole deal, and really it caused a lot of angst, and then they called us liars. And so if you're going to go out and meet with property owners in advance of right-of-way being out there, or any time, drag the right-of-way senior agent along with you, and you know, they'll be able to nip a lot of those things in the bud, and we won't end up getting ourselves into trouble. Some properties we just can't condemn, or we won't condemn. Things like railroads, other agencies, state, federal, local, tribes. So if you see a property like that on a project, you know, we need to have more time involved to really work those details out, because we don't have the hammer of condemnation on those, and so we have to politically get there on those. Access issues, I think, are always can be a nemesis, and the earlier we can get that access sub-team together and get those access issues resolved, and our strategy developed, and our letters out, and getting those access issues cleared up before right-of-way gets out there, I think really helps us out. since we're getting kind of short on time, I'm going to keep skipping down here. Project changes. Let's see, design changes. Of course, we talked about that a lot already. Now, the footprint, I don't need to beat you over the head with that, but not providing enough time in the schedule. Oh, here's a good one. Changes in project schedule that affect temporary easements. So a lot of times, TEs, the way they're written, they are written in a time frame. They're written for a period of time, 3 years, or the duration of or the completion of the project, whichever is sooner. So 3 years would be the minimum. Well, if a project got delayed for 2 years before, the bidlet kept getting pushed out, because they start when I get the property owner to sign. So from that date forward, that's when the clock starts ticking. And all of a sudden, we delayed the project another 2 years. Well, now you only got 1 year left on your TE. Well, that's not going to cut it. So then I have to go back out and get them signed up again and pay them more money. Second bite at the apple. And of course, right-of-way holdouts, just, anytime we have a Cert 3, it's not a good thing and it can cause problems. So in the interest of time, I am going to move to the last slide unless you had something.
I did want to bring one thing, so we'll get to your questions in just a second. Part of our authorization process, though, I want to make sure that you're aware of this, is we have to go to the OTC. When the legal descriptions come in, those have to get sent to the OTC. So we've been talking a lot about holding the footprint. If that footprint changes and we have to have a new legal description, that has to go back to the OTC. And I know we don't want to do that if we can avoid it as much as possible anymore. That's a key component to what we do, is submitting those things to OTC. So that's why it's so important to get that footprint set and to hold it. And we've got 5 minutes left for questions.
So you mentioned earlier about the slope easement that can be used for other reason, as long as you don't, interfere with the description of that, like parking the car or planting or whatever. So if you have a utility easement, can we use it temporary during construction for pedestrian to walk on top of it, or no? No. The reason?
Permanent easement for slope and utilities, and you wanted to use it temporarily to walk on it?
Just for pedestrian,
No.
for a T-park? No. Thank you.
No, and it would help, and we don't get too specific, but we have easements that cross over one another when we're buying. You will have an area, and they'll have multiple easements that do different things over that particular area.
So if you wanted to have that in your PE, it would also have to be a permanent easement for access of some sort, if you wanted that language in there. But that makes it very expensive, because that access then is in perpetuity. So you'd want to do a temporary easement over the permanent easement for access.
Brennan?
When I'm working with consultants, sometimes if we have willing sellers, they'll say, "Oh, we can get this done in 7 months." I always hear that 1 year is kind of the standard as far as setting timeframes and stuff like that. What should I do when I'm working with a consultant that says that? Should I go to the senior right-of-way agent in region, verify that, or what's the expectation there?
So the expectation should be that you still build in the year-long time. So part of the year-long time and why it's important is that it includes the amount of time that's necessary from the point that you actually get a no from the property owner to get through to the condemnation process. So you may have a willing property owner, things change. People change their minds, maybe they understand more about the project, they don't like it, or whatever. That would be my response to that situation. It's like, yeah, best case scenario, you get it done in 7 months, and maybe in fact that happens. It often happens. But if you shorten your timeline and then work from that assumption, and then it changes, then you're in big trouble. Thank you. Yeah.
The question? No, you guys have them right here.
For 1 more minute.
Okay, right over here. That'll be our last question.
What percentage of properties actually do have to be condemned in ODOT?
Well, historically, it's been less than 10%, but I think last year we went over that by a good percentage. So we try and keep it under 10. Now, that's just filed. That's not, we went all the way to court. We, maybe one project, one file a year goes to clear the trial. I'm going to a trial next month, but it's pretty rare, so.